you, Nuri. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. There's a lot to talk about today, so look forward to hearing all of your thoughts and questions. But first, just let me say a few words about the moment that I think we're in, what we've done, and what I hope we are about to do. Obviously, our country, our communities have had a really rough year. We've lost a lot of friends and neighbors and loved ones. Our economy has taken a huge hit. But I think it's also one of those rare moments in American history where possibly because we have been through so much, we have an opportunity to do big and bold things. Sometimes we have to experience something terrifying and terrible to motivate us to do something that is really good and worthwhile. And I think that's one of the moments, this is the moment that we are in. Just like the Great Depression led to the New Deal and Social Security, just like World War II and all of the trauma we experienced led the United States to build the United Nations and a whole global system to promote peace and human rights. Just like the threat of being annihilated during the Cold War created the pressure that led us to do things like the interstate highway system and passing civil rights legislation and putting a man on the moon. We lost 500,000 people to COVID, more than we lost in World War I and World War II combined. But I think partly as a result of that, we are now feeling the motivation and the impetus to do things that are long overdue for our country, on healthcare, on infrastructure, on rebuilding America and making our country a leader for the global economy in the 21st century. And the last few months, I think we've gotten a really good start. Since January, just 3 months, we've gone from insurrection to infrastructure in Washington, D.C. We started with a true low point in our recent history, and we now actually have the legislative gears working, producing legislation, delivering benefits to people, and on the verge, I think, of doing much more. So what have we done? You all know that, that last month we passed the American Rescue Plan, which was a bill to get us through the last few weeks, hopefully, or months of the COVID crisis, and to put our economy in a position where we can prosper once again. And I think most of you know the key features of that legislation: the stimulus checks, the unemployment benefits, small business assistance. We got something that I was fighting for most of the last year: direct aid to our county and municipal governments. I've been speaking to mayors, county commissioners for the last several weeks. We have a number of municipalities that were experiencing a very significant budget shortfall because of COVID. And we've now been able, in virtually every single case, to make up for that shortfall because of the legislation we passed. What does that mean for you? It means the services that you depend on are not going to get cut, and means that your property taxes don't have to go up. So very real, tangible benefits. And then a couple of things in the American Rescue Plan that I think are bigger than just immediate short-term relief. The bill includes, as I hope many of you know by now, a tax credit for children, for kids, that is fully refundable, $3,000 per child, $3,600 for kids under 6, and that goes all the way up to families making up to $150,000 a year. It's been estimated that this will cut child poverty in America by half. That is big. That is not tinkering around the edges. Second, healthcare. We put a provision in this bill that will make the Affordable Care Act actually affordable, particularly for people on the individual marketplace. The new rule says that no one should pay more than around 8% of their income for health insurance under the ACA marketplace, which means that a typical family of 4 in New Jersey will save hundreds of dollars a month on their health insurance. A 60-year-old couple making $75,000 a year in New Jersey on average will save around $1,200 a month, $1,200 a month. So all the talk about making healthcare more affordable, we just did something big, something bold, not tinkering around the edges. So that's delivered. What's on the way is what President Biden has described as his American Jobs Plan. This is not yet a bill. This is a proposal that has come to us from the president that we will turn into legislation in the House and the Senate over the next couple of months, hopefully by Memorial Day. And what this basically is a proposal to rebuild America, to fix things that need to be repaired. We've got the proposal includes funding to upgrade about 20,000 miles of roadway in America, around 10,000 bridges across the country, significant large projects, infrastructure projects that have importance for the whole economy. That's kind of bureaucratic code language for our Gateway project. Yes, it will be funded under this bill, as well as support for things like universal access to broadband internet, as well as support for replacing every single lead pipe in America so that our kids have safe water to drink, as well as support for the electric vehicle revolution, not just passenger cars, but buses and trucks, by installing electric charging stations across the country, by spurring research and development to make sure that this economic transformation that we are seeing from fossil fuels to clean energy is one that the United States of America will lead, not China, not some other country, but the United States of America. And all of these things are job creating. This is a bill that if fully implemented, will create millions of good paying, mostly union jobs in this country. About half the jobs will be available for folks without a college degree. And these are precisely the kinds of jobs that you can't outsource to Mexico or to China or to any other countries. These are jobs by definition that can only be performed by people working in our state, in our communities. This is a really, really big deal. We've had only a few moments like this in American history where we're just at the beginning of a very predictable economic transformation, and transformation particularly in transportation. You could say the transcontinental railroad under Lincoln, the interstate highway system under Eisenhower. We don't want to just fix those old things. We want to lead the way to a new revolutionary change in the way that we get around and in the way that we use energy, again, to make our country competitive so that we win this race to the future, but at the same time, by the way, doing our part to prevent catastrophic climate change. So I'm incredibly excited about this. As many of you know, I'm a member of the Transportation Infrastructure Committee in the House. I got on that committee precisely for this moment, precisely to do this. It'll bring all kinds of benefits to New Jersey, but also just a wonderful thing for the country as a whole. So with that, there's a whole lot more to this bill and to legislation that we'll be considering in its wake. And I know a lot of other issues I didn't have time to mention that are important to you and to me. I would love to hear your thoughts about anything that I said, but also anything else that you'd like me to share my reactions to. And with that, back to you, Nari, and over to everybody else for questions and comments.
Great, thanks, Tom. We are now going to begin with a few frequently asked questions that were submitted beforehand, and after that, we will go into live questioning. If your pre-submitted question was not answered during the FAQ portion, please ask again using the chat feature for it to be answered live today. Just a reminder that if you would like to ask a live question, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and I will add you to a list of questioners. Now is a great time to start submitting those questions as well. All right, Tom, for your first pre-submitted question, can you discuss the benefits for seniors and the American Rescue Plan?
Sure. So, of course, the American Rescue Plan, that's the COVID relief bill that we enacted, and that's helping people right now. That was for everybody. It was not a program it was not designed to help seniors specifically. It was designed to help everybody. But there were provisions in the bill that we passed with the needs of our senior population in mind. One very obvious example is that the stimulus checks that went out to most Americans went out automatically to seniors who don't file tax returns. That was an issue in the initial round last year, and we wanted to make sure that we made this as easy as possible for seniors. We also plussed up a lot of programs in the bill designed to, for example, get vaccines out to senior centers, nutrition programs for vulnerable seniors, a lot of other programs that have the needs of our senior, particularly most vulnerable senior populations in mind, were greatly increased by that bill. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Tom. All right, your next question is, how likely are you to make progress on your social media liability bill?
Well, thanks. So I think many of you have heard me talk about this. This is legislation that is designed to hold the large social media companies like Facebook accountable when their algorithms amplify content that leads to, say, a terrorist attack, violent hate crime, events like what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. It does so by reforming what has now become kind of a famous provision of law, Section 230 of the Communications and Decency Act, which basically immunizes these companies for anything that we may post on their sites. So even if they're writing algorithms that basically cause extremist content to spread wildly across the internet, they have absolutely no liability and therefore no incentive to change how they design their social networks. Of all the bills that have been introduced to try to amend Section 230, mine has the most co-sponsors. So we've gotten a lot of really good support within Congress from multiple respected organizations and experts outside of Congress. And from my discussions with our leadership in the House, I expect that the bill will be marked up, as we say. That means taken up and voted on by the relevant committee, which is the Energy and Commerce Committee, chaired by my New Jersey colleague, Congressman Frank Pallone, at some point this year when the committee takes up the whole issue of social media reform, combating extremism and hate online. Again, there are a number of proposals out there, and my expectation is that my bill will be considered and hopefully approved by the committee as part of a larger package.
Thank you, Tom. All right, we are going to take one more FAQ, and then we will begin live questioning. Again, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen if you would like to ask a live question to Tom. I will let you know when you are up next using that chat feature as well. But for your last FAQ, Tom, what is the status of gun safety legislation?
We have passed in the House legislation to establish universal background checks for every gun purchase in America, just like we have in New Jersey, and to close the so-called Charleston loophole, which is a loophole in the background check system that allowed the shooter at the church in Charleston several years ago to get his gun, even though he would have failed the background check, had the gun store been required to wait 3 days for the results of the background check to come through. And so this basically requires a short waiting period to allow the background check system to do its job and to provide the information that's needed to prevent the wrong people, dangerous people, from being able to acquire weapons. So those two bills passed the House. We've sent them over to the Senate. We no longer have Mitch McConnell as the majority leader. And so I'm fairly confident that there will at least be a vote in the United States Senate on this legislation, which is important because I think every senator should be forced to say yes or no. The overwhelming majority of the American people, upwards 90%, support these reasonable proposals. Most gun owners support these reasonable proposals. In a functioning democracy, this should be a no-brainer. And we will get a vote. That's the good news, up or down, and we'll see where these senators stand on what should be a completely non-controversial issue. You all may have questions, whether we're talking about gun violence or other important questions that will be before the Congress about the filibuster. So that's going to be, that's very much relevant to this, because if the filibuster is in place, we would need 60 votes in the Senate to pass, say, universal background checks. If it is not in place, or if the filibuster has been amended in some way to make it harder for senators to block legislation in that way, then we could pass universal background checks with fewer than 60 votes. I wish that wasn't a factor, because this should get 98 votes in the Senate, given how popular it is among the people all of us are sworn to represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. All right, we are going to begin our live question and answer portion. I will say it again. If you have a question for Tom, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and I will let you know when you will be our next questioner. We already have a lot of questions rolling in, so feel free to submit those questions anytime. All right, to start, we have Neil from Hillsborough. Neil, can you hear us?
Yep.
We can hear you.
I'm coming in. There I am. Congressman, hi. The question I have is, I happen to be a supporter of the bills that are out there, the economic bills, the trillions of dollars that are being proposed. But I also tend to be, I guess, somewhat conservative when it comes to economics. And my concern is, how are we going to pay for it? And I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. So yeah, look, it's a totally fair question, right? We ran up the deficit in 2017 with that tax bill that wasn't great for New Jersey, right? Because we lost the SALT deduction. We can talk about SALT, by the way, if anybody.
That was one of my other questions, by the way.
But it cut the corporate tax rate from 35 to 21% without dealing with the loopholes. So we've got dozens of major corporations in America, from Amazon, the biggest of them all, to FedEx and plenty of others that paid zero tax the last few years. In fact, some of these big companies get a refund. They're getting negative tax, basically, despite doing incredibly well through the pandemic. So we did that, and then we had a real crisis. And I think most of us agree we had to spend money,
yes,
or we'd have been in a depression for years. And now we are proposing to spend even more on investment, because infrastructure is investment. It's something that we traditionally do pay for whether you're a company or a city, you pay for it by over years by borrowing upfront, and then usually by issuing a bond, right, to build a bridge or build a tunnel. But it all adds up. So for the jobs bill, for the infrastructure bill, President Biden has proposed a couple of things that I would support, although we're going to have to look at them very carefully and issue our own verdict in the Congress. Number one, increasing the corporate rate, not back to where it was in 2017, because most people agreed that 35 was too high. Biden has proposed 28%. Back in 2017, the big business groups in the country were proposing 25. My guess is it'll end up somewhere between 25 and 28. Also, very importantly, this doesn't get talked about enough. The administration is proposing a global minimum tax. Basically, they're looking for a way, and I want to help them find a way to ensure that multinational corporations can't evade paying their taxes by putting their profits, booking their profits to subsidiaries in, little islands in the South Pacific, right?
Yeah.
Where there's no corporate tax. So what they've been doing is booking their losses to their headquarters in the US, booking their profits to the tax shelter, and they get away with paying no taxes. So we got to find a way and do this ideally in cooperation with our allies in Europe to just put an end to that. The rate can be low, but they got to pay it wherever they're doing business. And then finally, something that that wouldn't require raising anybody's taxes by 1 cent, and that's actually investing in everybody's favorite government agency, the IRS. Okay, it's not our favorite, but you and I pay higher taxes because there are people who find ways to avoid paying their taxes, right? And if you've got a salary, if you're making whatever, $85,000, you're working for a company, the IRS knows exactly what you're making. Your taxes are withheld, right? There's no way to cheat, even if you wanted to. But if you're, say, billionaire real estate developer, there are multiple ways, if you put your mind to it, to hide what you're doing. And the IRS, we've been shrinking it and shrinking it and shrinking it. They do not have the resources to actually enforce the tax laws. And I've seen estimates suggesting we could raise well over $1 trillion over 10 years just by investing in the IRS the way we did 30 or 40 years ago. And so anybody who's honestly paying their taxes would not be affected by that one bit, right? So those are some of the things that we're looking at. Bigger, tougher conversations, healthcare costs. That's a question that I keep asking, and it's probably too difficult a conversation to have in the middle of a pandemic. But ultimately, to really balance the federal budget, we're going to have to get the cost of Medicare down and deal with why Americans pay more for healthcare than people anywhere else in the world. So that's a start.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
Thank you both. Next up, we have Bill from Basking Ridge. Bill, can you hear us?
Yes. Tom, first, thank you very much for supporting and co-sponsoring the revised version of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. I forget the new number now, but last year was 763. Would you talk a little bit about your expectations for this act in this session of Congress?
Yeah. So that's a fancy name for a bill that basically puts a market price on the carbon that we burn and emit into the atmosphere, the thing that causes climate change, and that basically takes the money that would come into the government as a result of that fee on the use of carbon and returns it to the American people, to every single American, in the form of a dividend. And so basically the idea here is dealing with climate change through the free market, by giving every company in America and every consumer in America an economic incentive to transition to clean energy. Because if you're using clean energy, then you're not paying the fee, but you're still getting the dividend, right? And so it just makes it more affordable for everybody to do what needs to be done without regulation, without government mandates. So I've always thought this is a great idea. This is actually a Republican idea originally, and I'm always hopeful that we can find bipartisanship around this stuff. Many Republicans don't like government mandates and regulations, so this is a really good alternative. I'd like it to be part of the conversation on the infrastructure bill that we are proposing. That infrastructure bill does a lot to deal with climate change, because we're talking about mass transit, we're talking about electrical vehicles and charging stations. I think carbon fee and dividend would be a great addition. Interesting development, Senator Romney has come out basically in favor of this. So we do now have another Republican voice arguing that we should consider this. So I hope it'll be part of the conversation, but I can't promise you more than that, because it has become harder, not easier, over the last 10 years to get folks on the other side of the aisle to consider really serious mechanisms to deal with climate change.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Just a reminder, if you do have a question, I see a few people having their hands raised. Please use the chat feature to first ask your question and let me know your name and the town you are from as well. And I have seen a few people ask about issues with their stimulus check or problems they're having with the New Jersey Department of Labor or with their unemployment. If that is something you are dealing with, we ask that you please fill out our casework form. That is malinowski.house.gov/casework. We will have a staff member look over your information and reach out to you once we have that. So thank you very much for reaching out to us with those inquiries. Next up, we have Stephen from Delaware Township. Stephen, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Go ahead with your question.
Hi, Tom. We had met during your campaign talking about the Penny's pipeline, where there was a gathering of people in Delaware Township. And there were the ideas that FERC was basically ignoring some of the comments that people had, where they'd shown flaws in the Penny's pipeline. And I was wondering if there's any progress in looking at what FERC was ignoring, NEPA and things like that. And the other quick question was the status of making DC a state. So I'd be happy to hear.
Let's see, do we still have Tom on the line?
Hey, sorry, I was muted for some reason.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. I was trying to think of some clever way to combine my answer to those two questions, but I don't think I can. On pennies, I was actually just out in Delaware Township, just meeting with families, with homeowners along the pipeline route. This is something I'm intensely focused on. I just cannot tell you how tragic it would be for those of you who don't live there, who may not be affected by it, just how tragic it would be to allow the construction of this natural gas pipeline across not just public lands that need to be preserved, but through the front and backyards of folks who have spent, in some cases, decades investing in their beautiful farms, and to see their trees uprooted, their land dug up, bulldozers and earth moving equipment in their backyards, for which they are being offered compensation of like, you know, hey, take $40,000 so that we can completely ruin your homestead. For a natural gas pipeline that New Jersey does not need economically, because we have a system, a federal system that allows for that allows companies basically to get a 14% guaranteed return on investment if they can just get a pipeline approved. And by the way, since there's no added demand in New Jersey for the natural gas, as we've seen winter after winter, the only way to pay these companies a 14% return on investment is to jack up our natural gas rates. So we all get screwed as consumers of natural gas as well. So I've been doing several things. Number one, I want to change the system for approval of pipelines. And I have legislation that we actually passed in the House last year. We're going to do it again this year, hopefully with better chances in the Senate. I have legislation to defend landowners facing eminent domain claims, so that if a pipeline is proposed, the companies cannot, for example, dig up all your trees until they get literally all of the approvals. Because I don't, you know, the worst thing would be they dig up your trees, ruin your land, and then whoops, they can't build the pipeline, but sorry, you know, your land will never be restored to what it was. So we're working on legislation to deal with the next iteration of this. But we've also been talking to FERC. I've started a conversation with the new Biden administration about the current pipeline and whether there are ways that the federal government can still intervene to try to make sure that this thing doesn't get built. And I've also had multiple conversations with Governor Murphy about this as well, because it has to go through several layers of approval at the state level. There's a case before the Supreme Court, by the way, where the Biden administration took the wrong position, and I condemn them for that. If we win that case, then I think we're golden. If we don't, then all of these other things that I just described still give us multiple viable options for blocking the pipeline.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you both. Next up, we have Stira from Asbury. Stira, can you hear us? Stira, do we have you on the line?
Yes, you do. I just had to unmute you.
No.
Thanks. I'm very glad to be able to ask my wonderful congressman a question that's been on my mind a lot, namely the post office and this current postmaster who has dug in his heels and says, get used to it, I'll be here a long time. Is that true?
Well, he's changed his tune a little bit since that moment of arrogance. That was not a... You don't go before the US Congress and say, get used to me, I don't care what you think, you know? So it is true, the president can't fire him directly. There's, you know, we created a system that insulates the post office a little bit from, you know, from politics, from presidents who want to try to use the post office for their own ends. So there's a postal board of governors that hires and fires the postmaster general. And President Biden just nominated a bunch of new members to fill vacancies in the postal board of governors. So he nominates, the Senate confirms. And at that point, I think there's going to be new accountability once those folks are confirmed. There's a real difference of opinion here. You know, this postmaster general thinks of the postal service as a business. You know, it's like FedEx, right? And so it should focus on profit making above all other things. I see it as a service. It's one of the flagship government agencies that's been around since the dawn of the United States. It is a wonderful thing that you can send a piece of mail from anywhere in America to any place in America, have it reliably delivered for an affordable rate. And by the way, the Amazons of the world depend on the post office for that last mile of delivery. Like so a good part of the American economy depends on this. Seniors and veterans get their prescriptions through the post office, not to mention many of us getting our ballots through the post office in the last election and in future elections. So this has to be seen as a public service, and it should be efficiently run. It shouldn't be losing money. And there are issues relating to pension obligations that we've been trying to deal with. There are some simple fixes that can be made to basically allow the post office to not lose money, at least while providing this service. And that's the direction we should go in. And, different Congress, different president, it will take a few months because it is rightly insulated from politics, but I think we're going to see some changes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dara.
Thanks, Dara. Thanks, Tom. Next up, we have Mimi from Flemington. Mimi, can you hear us?
Hi, yes, I can.
Go ahead with your question.
Mimi.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Representative Malinowski. My name is Mimi. I use she, they pronouns, and I'm one of your constituents from Flemington, New Jersey, as mentioned. I voted for you twice now because I believed and still believe that you'll do a better job of representing my interests than either of your opponents. I'm really glad to hear that you understand the urgency of this moment and that you're keeping bold solutions in mind. That's why I'm here to speak on behalf of the Sunrise Movement and Sunrise Hunterdon County. We're in the middle of a historic crisis. COVID and the economic recession have left 18 million people unemployed and millions more underemployed. Yet studies show that it will take a workforce of 25 million to transition our energy grid and avoid the most devastating impacts of climate change. That 25 million doesn't even include other critical work the government could employ people to do, like care, education, healthcare, and rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, just like you just mentioned. In a country so abundant in wealth and resources, there's no reason anyone should be struggling to find work. And your constituents in Hunterdon County are here to tell you it is time to guarantee good jobs for all. Here's the pledge. I commit to doing everything in my power to pass legislation that guarantees good jobs for all, invest $10 trillion over the next decade to create millions of union jobs, addressing the crises of climate change, economic inequality, and systemic racism, and put money into the hands of people and communities, not the wealthy few. Representative Malinowski, we have sent this pledge to your office and received no response. Time is running out and action must be taken. There's a group of activists from Sunrise Hunterdon County holding a march and rally outside your office in Somerville, New Jersey right now in order to demand that you sign the Good Jobs for All pledge. We've also just dropped off mock resumes to your office where you can read some of our stories. We will continue to fight for change, and we will not stop until you make a commitment to do your job, go back to DC, and be brave and fight for us. Representative Malinowski, I'm here to respectfully ask you to fight for a livable planet and for good jobs in our communities, to fight to pass legislation that guarantees every American who wants a job can have one, and be a part of building a just, sustainable, and people-centered new economy. Based on what you've said here today, I believe we are on the same page regarding good jobs and the climate. Will you sign the Good Jobs for All pledge?
Thank you, Mimi. Thanks for raising that. And I know some of your, some members of the movement were outside the office today, and we're not working there yet because of COVID, but I look forward to meeting with you guys again in person once we're back to normal. My answer to you is I think that's exactly what we're doing. And I think sometimes, to the extent we've ever disagreed on these things, it's that I do tend to be reluctant to sign on to very general pledges. I want to see legislation. I want to see the actual proposal. And I'm absolutely calling for bold proposals right now. We just delivered one in the American Rescue Plan. That was real. That is helping people right now. We are now working on another one, this American Jobs Plan, which is not yet a bill, as I mentioned, but it will be. And it will concretely answer a lot of the questions that you just asked. It is a bill to create millions of good paying jobs. As I've said, half of them would go or could go to people without college degrees, with a huge emphasis on speeding America's transition to clean energy. But that's, you know, that's real, it's concrete. And so I want to be delivering actual legislation. That's my job. And I'm sometimes a little hesitant to sign on to things that are very general, because, you know, I need to know exactly what they mean, because I'm going to be held accountable, right, by all of these good people here, including those who worry that we're, you know, about the amount of money we're spending, and what taxes are we going to raise or change in order to pay for it. I owe them an answer to those questions, right, so that they can hold me accountable. So that's the bottom line. I think you guys, based on the principles you've laid out, I think you guys are going to really like a lot of what's in this plan. You may not like all of it. You may think it doesn't go far enough in some respects, and that's fine. But at least we'll be talking about something really concrete, where we can all see the benefits and the costs. So that's my pledge to you. I will vote for a bill that concretely creates jobs in this country while accelerating our transition to clean energy. And I want that bill to be big and bold. All right. Thank you for raising it.
Thank you for your time.
Sure.
Thank you, Mimi, and thank you, Tom. Next up, we have Pete from Bernardsville. Pete, can you hear us? Pete, do we have you on the line?
You hear me now?
We can hear you, Pete.
I think we see the demonstration there outside the office, so.
Okay, you hear me?
Pete, we can hear you. Yes, you can continue with your question.
Okay, Tom, by the way, you didn't answer the question about DC, just to remind you. But my question has to do with the recent changes to the election laws in Georgia. I've read and watched different sides to this, the changes. I'm just curious, what is your understanding of the changes to Georgia's election law?
Right. So on DC, I'm sorry.
They try to.
Hey guys, let's not interfere with other folks who are asking questions, okay? I heard your message, so let's let everybody else contribute theirs. Thank you. On DC statehood, I've been for DC statehood all my life. It's just such a simple issue. For me, every single American should have voting representation in the Congress, period. I don't understand why that's controversial. And then we should have the Congress that is elected by the American people. The Democrats should for people's votes.
People rise up, the powers come down.
Just going to come in here really quickly. If we ask that you keep your mics muted at all times, and if you have a question, please use the chat feature to have your question addressed.
They try to stop us, but we keep coming back. Gotta rise up, rise.
Yeah.
We gotta rise up.
This is not helping your cause here.
The powers come. When the people rise up, the powers.
Again, we just please ask that if you have a question, please, or you have a comment that you would like to address with Tom, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. We are more than happy to continue to talk about this issue. We ask that you first address it with us and let the other participants ask their questions regarding issues concerning them as well.
Now, what do we want? Good job.
Is there a way to just
want them now.
project that?
Job. When do we want them? Now. What do we want? Good job.
Yes, we are continually muting them as well.
I know. Can you actually?
When do we want them? Now. What do we want? Good job.
Thanks.
All right, let's continue on.
All righty. Sorry about that.
Malinowski, sign up, please. Malinowski, sign up, please. Malinowski sign the pledge.
All right, go ahead, Tom. I think we have the situation taken care of.
Thanks. Well, we're seeing a good example of not very smart activism there. Anyway, so on the Georgia situation, look, I'm a legislator, and one thing I can tell you is that when a legislative body takes up a bill, especially when it does so with urgency, it's doing so to solve a problem. What on earth is the problem in Georgia that those legislators were trying to solve? The governor, the Secretary of State, all the election officials in the state made clear that their election in November and then their Senate runoff were the most secure elections in the history of that state, that there was absolutely no fraud. They were actually quite brave in pushing back against President Trump's accusations that, that those elections were somehow marred by fraud. So what is the problem that they're trying to solve? The only problem I can think of from their point of view is that too many people voted and the wrong people won. And so the legislation that they passed, you have to start with a motivation that led these folks to urgently, as quickly as they could, introduce first dozens of proposals to make it harder to vote, and then to pass what ended up passing. Now, what ended up passing was not as bad as some of the things that were proposed, because there was a tremendous amount of pressure from within Georgia and from all around the country. So there was a provision that would have prohibited early voting on Sundays, which was just so plainly designed to try to limit voting by African-American folks in Georgia. But there are still provisions that make it harder for people to vote by mail. They've limited the number of drop boxes. Like, why would you do that? Drop boxes are great. We had them in New Jersey. They were easy to use. They were secure. Everybody loved them. Why would you rush through a piece of legislation to allow fewer drop boxes in a state if your motivation is not making it harder for people to vote? So I find it very disturbing that this is what legislators anywhere in America, at a moment of economic crisis, when we have so many real problems to deal with, that they're trying to make it harder to vote. So many of you know we have in the House of Representatives passed two pieces of legislation: extension renewal of the Voting Rights Act of 1965 and H.R. 1, which is a bill that basically makes it easier for people to vote while making it harder for billionaires to secretly buy elections. We've sent those over to the Senate, and I expect sometime this year there's going to be a clash between voting rights and the filibuster in the United States Senate. And whatever the rules of the Senate may be, they should not stand in the way of a majority of elected representatives of the people securing the most basic right of the people to vote.
Thank you both. Let's move on to Julia from Hillsborough. Julia, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Hi. I wanted to ask about the rapid COVID testing. So I understand that there are multiple already that have been approved by the FDA, not approved, but authorized by the FDA. Oh, here we go. Crazy.
Go on, I hear you.
All right,
Crazy,
continue
sorry.
on.
Yeah, so
Sorry about
multiple have been authorized by the FDA, but I am continuing to check everywhere, and we're still not able to access them as easily as we could just go into a pharmacy and get a test for something like a pregnancy test. So have you heard anything, Andrew? Do you know anything about what's being done? I know there was 230 million provided to Illum, which is one of the Australian companies making it, and that was back in December. And here we are in April, and there's still any not available.
I don't think I can tell you more than you already know. Obviously, it would be great to have easy access to rapid testing. You know, even a year ago, experts were talking about this as a potential breakthrough that we needed to try to encourage. As you know, we've spent a lot of money at the federal level encouraging scientific breakthroughs in dealing with COVID. And where we've been most successful, of course, is in the rapid development of the vaccine, something, and I'm a big critic of the Trump administration, but that's something I give them full credit for. The Project Warp Speed was just a great example of government, private sector, and our country's scientists working together on something that none of them could have done alone, that has made a difference in the lives of so many people. A good example of why we need effective, competent government in America. On the rapid testing, we haven't moved as quickly, and I don't know if I'm qualified to really be able to explain to you why that is, but certainly it is a good reminder that even with the vaccine, which we hope everyone will have had by the summer, we still need these developments in rapid testing because number one, not everyone may get vaccinated, unfortunately. Number two, there are these variants, and we cannot be certain yet that the vaccines that we've developed, that we've deployed, will continue to be fully effective against every potential future variant. And so our public health system is going to have to be able to detect outbreaks very, very quickly as part of our, the defense that we need to put up and keep up against pandemics in the future. So it's a very good reminder. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Tom. Let's go to Brian from Raritan. Brian, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for having these town hall meetings, Congressman Malinowski. I really appreciate it and respect it. It's something that we need to see more of from our public officials, and you're certainly up there with regard to this. So I'm elated that the election finally turned out the way that it did, and that decency is becoming kind of cool again in this country. For so long, people have been just nasty, regardless of their political affiliation. It's just been a hostile place that we've been living in, at least in my estimation. But getting to my question, it sounds like President Biden and the Democratic leadership certainly want to chart a course for getting some necessary work done, moving us forward, fixing our crumbling infrastructure, helping people, as the COVID relief bill was intended to do. And I support all of that very much. But I have a concern, and the concern is just dollars and cents. I'm looking at our debt to GDP ratio, and I'm not an economist, but it's certainly bad when your debt exceeds your GDP. And we're I think about 130% debt to GDP. Our debt is $28 trillion, and most people have a trouble understanding how many millions of dollars that is. That's $28 million to put it another way. And I just don't know how this is sustainable. I look at places like Greece. I look at the problems that Europe had a little while ago. I look at the problems in Puerto Rico. I'm always weary about the risk of hyperinflation. And I just wonder how you're going to balance, fiscal responsibility with the need to do what really needs to be done, but really trying to find compromises and not always go for the high number. So I'm just curious what you think to do here. It's not an easy solution that we're in. I wish we had invested before. So I'll just shut up and let you talk now.
No, that's fine. And look, I'm with you on this. I worked for a Democratic president who worked with a Republican Congress to balance our budget the last time that happened in the late 1990s. And then, we squandered it with magical tax cuts that were supposed to produce higher tax revenues, and of course did not, without actually cutting spending, because military spending went way up in the 2000s. And then, you know, we had an economic crisis in 08 that required us to spend a lot more money. Obama tried to get the deficit under control and made some progress. It was a lot lower when he ended than when he started. And then once again, you know, 2017, we just like gave it all away with that 2017 tax bill that fueled a few months of artificial partying on Wall Street and invested absolutely nothing in our long-term economic strength. Now, some Democrats, when they hear this question, they kind of end there and they're like, well, why should we have to deal with a deficit when the Republicans didn't care about it when they were in office? And, you know, they're even worse. But that's not a responsible enough answer for me. It's true, but it's not responsible enough because we now have the responsibility. So that's where we get into some of the things that I was talking about, I think, when Neil asked me the question about how we pay for the infrastructure bill. I do think we have to have an honest conversation about how we pay for some of these things. That would include things like ensuring that corporate America pays for the infrastructure that it's using. By the way, you know, the infrastructure bill is hugely popular, like 2 to 1. People, you know, the pollsters ask Americans now, would you support a $3 trillion infrastructure bill? It's like 2 to 1 for. And when you tell them how the president plans to pay for it, support actually goes up, not down. You know, when you say that it's increasing the corporate tax rate to 28% and closing loopholes and recouping taxes that they're evading by putting their money in tax shelters. You know, that's stuff that the American people absolutely support. Understanding that, like, you know, Amazon couldn't be Amazon if not for the public roads and airports and ports and all the infrastructure that we pay for so that they can deliver their stuff around the world. So that is one thing that we're going to do, or that he's proposed and that I support. Another thing, and we talked about this before, is investing in the IRS and actually collecting the taxes that particularly wealthy individuals in corporate America owes, and which are too easily evaded right now for any tax-paying entity that doesn't have its income taxes automatically withheld, as most of us, right? We can't cheat because they're withheld, and the IRS knows what we owe. There are estimates that, I mean, very serious estimates that suggest we could that alone, without raising anybody's taxes by 1 penny, could get us $1 to $1.5 trillion, which would be a significant down payment. And then again, as I alluded to before, on top of revenue, I think we need to have a really serious and difficult conversation in our country about healthcare costs and why we're spending about twice as much of our national wealth on healthcare as the average wealthy country in Europe, Canada, Japan, et cetera, where their healthcare is just as good as ours. That's a tough conversation, but ultimately, to deal with the structural problem that you just raised, that's what we're going to have to do. I'll end with one last note for the true policy wonks on the call. One reason, I mean, I'm worried about it. One reason I'm not panicking is because of a unique advantage that the United States has, and that is that we have the dollar, and the dollar is the world's reserve currency. Basically, every country in the world trusts the dollar, and so when they have reserves, they hold them in our currency, in dollars. And that is one of the reasons why we can borrow so much to be able to get ourselves through this crisis, why we can borrow to invest in the infrastructure of the future. People and countries all around the world are still putting their money in our currency. So that's something that buys us time as we address the tough question that you raised. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. And hopefully, either in this administration or, the subsequent one, hopefully we'll see a balanced budget again. Fingers crossed.
I hope so.
Thanks, Brian. We have time for just a few more questions here. So let's go to Dan from Greenbrook. Dan, can you hear us?
Yes. Good afternoon, Congressman. So I'll keep it relatively short. As a successful home-owning millennial, I have been paying my student loans for about 9 years now. I've barely put a dent in them. This continues to be a major item on our budget each month. And I'd be done paying them next year if there wasn't any interest rate on them. But instead, I'll be paying them for the next 20 years or more. The government should not act like a predatory lender and profit off my need for educational financing. My disposable income should be supporting small businesses in my district, not the federal coffers. Will you support ending interest on all existing and new student loans in lieu of the overall principal reduction? And to quote the Democratic head of the House Committee of Financial Services, yes or no?
What's your interest rate, by the way, Dan?
Off the top of my head, I believe it's something like 8%.
Yeah,
it's basically a credit card. So
this is why your question is totally valid, right? I mean, who the hell is paying 8% interest? Especially right now, where market interest rates are close to zero. No one's paying that for a home. No small business owners paying 8% for a small business loan. We would be outraged, right, if that were happening. And yet, in a situation where Congress actually has a lot of say, we've got people like you paying exorbitant rates for what some might consider the privilege of having an education, but I consider a contribution that you are making to us, right? Because it enables you to be successful, to be a taxpayer, to spend money, to support the economy, and do other great and cool things. So I totally agree with the sentiment of your question. We will absolutely make an effort to address it this year. There will be an effort to have student loan reform, substantial student loan reform this year. The current plan, we've been talking about the Biden infrastructure bill, right? That's supposed to be part one. Part two is supposed to be a bill that focuses on education in the workforce. And we are going to be debating all kinds of proposals to deal with student loans. That's one of them. You notice I'm not giving you a yes or no because I don't know yet, and I want to be straight with you. I'm attracted to a lot of different ideas here. I mean, at the very least, capping student loan repayments as a percentage of income, which is what we just did on health insurance, right, under the Affordable Care Act. That's a way of making sure that if there is a burden, that it's a very manageable burden for young people who are just at that point where we want them to be buying a house, we want them to be buying a car, we want them to be able to afford to contribute to the economy. I'm not sure if I want to cancel all student loan debt or cancel student loan interest. I want to see what the impact is going to be, but I will support far-reaching proposals to make sure that nobody has to experience the ridiculous burden that you are going through right now. It shouldn't be anywhere near 8%. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. All right, next up we have Jeffrey from Montgomery. Jeffrey, can you hear us?
I can, thank you very much.
Hey,
so, hi, Congressman. I love your last name. I'm Polish also, so it's nice to be a brethren of yours. I applaud your efforts with renewable energy. I've been in the solar energy field for 33 years now, so I applaud what you're doing. It warms my heart. But I did have a question about the relief bill, the COVID relief bill and the infrastructure bills. And I see and read that only a relatively very small percentage of the trillions of dollars allocated to these bills will be spent on the purpose of the bills. There's a lot of money going to other places. Seems like special projects. It just bothers me as a taxpayer that so much money is being wheeled into other purposes within these bills. Can you give me a little idea of what you're thinking? Am I wrong in here or thinking that so much money is just not going to the purposes of the bills?
So first of all, yeah, we both have Polish names, but you have the honor of having an SZCZ set together, which I love. And I defy anybody else on this call to pronounce it correctly except for you and me. So number one, I bow to you, sir.
Well, thank you.
Number two, yeah, you know, I would dispute that. And I know that there's a lot sort of, you know, there's a lot going around the internet, pro and con, and you know that some of the stuff that we read in our heated political debate on these things isn't like 100% accurate. So one of the things I've seen is the accusation that the American Rescue Plan, the COVID relief bill that we enacted, that only 10% of that money has anything to do with COVID. Here's how they got that figure. They only counted the money in the bill that directly supports COVID testing and vaccines, right? In other words, the money for programs that actually directly fight the virus. But they did not include the stimulus checks. They did not include the extended unemployment benefits. They did not include the special grant program that we set up for restaurants so that they could get through this crisis. Obviously, restaurants and bars particularly hard hit. They didn't include the relief for Amtrak and New Jersey Transit for our transit agencies that have had no ridership because of COVID, right? So the economic relief that I think is necessary to deal with the economic crisis that was caused by COVID, they didn't include in that calculation so that they could say this has nothing to do with COVID. There were a couple of things in an early version of the bill, by the way, like there was something, somebody got a few $1 million in there for some bridge in northern New York. And I think there was even something for like a mass transit project in California that people thought Nancy Pelosi wanted. Those things were like teeny, like 0.001% of the bill, and we took them out anyway. It was dumb to put them in because it just leads to this kind of debate, but they weren't even in the bill at the end. So the only big things that you could argue were not like, you know, you could at least argue were maybe kind of beyond COVID. The child tax credit that I referenced, the reduction in our health insurance premiums. Now, I would say it's all part of economic stimulus because it means more money in people's pockets. But even if you don't think it's COVID related, heck, I ran in 2018 promising I would fight to try to lower your health insurance premiums. And we just did it. So you can think it's COVID related or not, I'm damn proud of it. I think it was a good thing to do. But certainly the overwhelming share, even if you don't think that's COVID related, overwhelming share of dollars in that bill, either directly to fight the virus or to help people who are struggling with the economic crisis that the virus caused in ways that I think the overwhelming majority of Americans support. So that would be my answer. Happy, you know, if you want to write us, if there are particular spending items in the bill that you think are unwarranted or inappropriate, then, you know, I'd love to hear from you. And I might agree or disagree, but overwhelmingly, I think that's what I would say about that bill.
Thank you for your viewpoint.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Let's go to Helen from Lambertville. Helen, can you hear us?
I can hear you. I've just unmuted.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you as well.
All right. I actually had two questions, but the first one that you've probably stumbled on relates to potable water supply and the infrastructure. I have been seriously disturbed to watch over the years the increasing role that bottled water has to play in supplying our potable water. And this is extravagantly expensive in every aspect. The amount of money that the public spends on bottled water by orders of magnitude exceeds the amount of money that we would have been taking from our pockets had we been maintaining our potable water supply and delivery systems. Is anything being done in the infrastructure to address this problem? Because this is a plastics problem. This is a transportation problem with the trucking. The good faith of the public in our public supply systems has been so eroded by our underfunding of them.
Yep.
Now people by default want to go to bottled water.
Yep. Totally agree with you, Helen. Bottling water in Fiji and flying it to the United States is not the best way to supply Americans with clean drinking water. Let's put it that way, for all kinds of reasons. Clean water is a right and the wealthiest, most advanced country in the world ought to be able to deliver clean water to every home in the 21st century. So this is infrastructure. There's a silly debate right now about like, what is infrastructure? And if it's not a road or a bridge, it's not infrastructure. Obviously, our water and sewer infrastructure is vital. It will be a big part of the bill. It's a big part of what Biden has proposed. I'm absolutely certain it will be a big part of what we enact. One of the things that the proposal aims to do is to replace every lead pipe in America that delivers water and that exposes us potentially, particularly our kids, to lead poisoning. We saw what happened in Flint, Michigan. We have multiple potential Flints in New Jersey. We have very similar problems throughout the state. So this is something that will benefit New Jersey greatly. And it also just makes sense. Like if we're going to be tearing up roads to repair them, why would we tear up a road in 2021 to repair it, only to tear it up again 5 years later to get at the pipes underneath the road, or to get at the wires, right, to hook people up to broadband? If we're going to do this, let's do it at once, and get our country better transportation and cleaner drinking water and access to the internet at the same time. So that's what we aim to do.
My second question related to the U.S. savings bonds and funding all of these projects. We did fund a world war with public contributions, and the public got the interest, not the banks. The banks are going to make a killing on this project. Just thought.
Yep. Well, we still bond projects, and you know that will remain a very important part of how we finance public infrastructure in the United States.
But the question is, the bonding money comes from the banks now, not from the public. So the banks get the interest, the public doesn't. It's just a thought.
Yeah, I take your point.
Okay.
Thanks, Helen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Helen. And thanks, Tom. And thank you everyone for participating on today's call. We are nearing the end. If you didn't have a question answered during today's conversation, we always welcome you to contact our office, and we are more than happy to have your question answered. Like I said in the beginning, if your question is in regards to a federal agency, an issue with a federal agency that is, please visit malinowski.house.gov/casework and fill out our online casework form. All right, and from there, I will turn it over to Tom for some closing remarks.
Thanks, Nuri. Do we have no more questions? Because I have time for maybe another one if.
We don't have any more questions at this time.
Because I see a couple of hands.
Yes, with hands raised, I just asked that you please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. That is how we are fielding these questions.
I'm happy to just I see Dana. I'm happy to just take a quick question.
Sure, Dana, go ahead.
Okay.
Thank you. I submitted a question via the chat. I'm not sure if you got it. I'm here on behalf of the lung cancer community. I know we have spoken before. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for your previous support of the cause. And there are two things that you can specifically help us with at this time. There is a Dear Colleague letter circulating with Representative Boyle that I'm asking you to sign on to. It's asking for support for research dollars for lung cancer, as well as report language in the appropriations bill to the NIH to help advance lung cancer research. And the other thing is we're asking for your co-sponsorship of HR 1800. It is the Women and Lung Cancer Research and Preventive Services Act of 2021.
Thank you. It's always good to see you. And I will take a look at both of those today.
Great.
And we will, as you know, I strongly support robust research in these areas. My goodness, we've had a year of extraordinary breakthroughs.
Right.
And let's
from earlier, our nation's deadliest cancers should not receive the least amount of funding. It's a no-brainer.
Yes, you've made that very powerful point before, and it stuck with me. So, as always, we'll take a very quick look, and I don't see any reason why not. But
and then you're visiting your buddy, Representative Cologne, because the bill is in the Energy and Commerce Committee. So when you visit him, if you can help get along.
That's the most important request, actually.
Would be very much appreciated. I appreciate it. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Tom, you can go ahead with some closing remarks, and we will finish up this call.
Sure. Thanks, everybody, for being on, and as always, for asking such a wide range of really good and timely questions. We're dealing with a lot of challenges as a country, as we always do. The economic crisis, the final struggle against COVID, complicated issues like immigration that we didn't have a chance to get to today. But as I said at the beginning, I think moments of crisis can also be moments of great opportunity, because they spur us to think boldly, to do the things that we've been putting off for way too long. And my goal this year is to try to ride this wave of boldness as far as we can, responsibly, to address problems that many of you have been raising with me since I first ran in 2018. We're going to get that gateway tunnel. We're going to try to address the SALT deduction, which we also didn't address in the Q&A. But the more legislation moves through the Congress this year, the more opportunities I'm going to have to insist that we get some fix for our middle-class taxpayers in New Jersey as well. We've already taken a huge cut out of healthcare costs, and there's more that we can do to try to make sure that everybody in the United States has access to healthcare and that it's affordable. And then, of course, the infrastructure, which is sort of not a very inspiring word. It's got too many consonants, kind of like my last name and Jeffrey's. But it is something that will, if we do it right, we are going to look upon our country with such pride in the years to come. And so I'm really, really excited about the opportunities that are before us right now. And as we seize them, my priorities are shaped by your questions at these forums, because I know I'm going to need to have an answer the next time I get the question. So thank you again for joining. Look forward to seeing you at the next one. We're going to keep doing this, and everybody stay safe and healthy, and enjoy the early days of spring. Bye-bye.